Greetings once again everyone. Regular viewers of this channel may know that my absolute favourite optics to test are wide and ultra-wide angle lenses with bright maximum apertures. So as you can imagine, the following new lens from Sigma got me as excited as a barrel full of monkeys on nitrous oxide. Or as my 4-year-old daughter, when given a new Fireman Sam sticker book, it's about the same. This is the Sigma 14mm f1.4 DG-DN Art for L-mount or Sony E-mount full-frame mirrorless cameras. f1.4 is a world record brightness for such a wide-angle full-frame lens. This is the widest angle f1.4 camera lens ever made for full-frame. Talk about ambitious. And at $1,500 US, it's not cheap either. But if its quality is good enough, then a lens could definitely find a market among architecture and event photographers, but most of all, astrophotographers, who, Sigma tell me, this lens is especially intended for. I'd like to thank Sigma UK for loaning me a copy of this lens for a couple of weeks for evaluation, although as usual, this is a totally independent review. I had to give the lens back afterwards, unfortunately. And just look at these images. Even at such a wide angle, f1.4 can give you beautifully out of focus backgrounds if you get a little close to your subject, and it is a huge help for shooting in dark situations also. This is a lens that could potentially really distinguish your work from the competition. Let's look at its build quality first. Unsurprisingly, considering its parameters, the lens is big and heavy at about 1.2 kilograms or 2.5 pounds, and it feels very tough and tightly assembled. Also unsurprising is that Sigma gave the front element a bulb-shaped design, which is always the best way to deliver best image quality out of extremely wide-angle lenses, especially if they have bright apertures. The drawback, of course, for landscape photographers is that you cannot use front filters, including polarizing filters, as a result, although there is a holder around the rear lens mount for whatever gel filters you may wish to use, and I'm sure one or two big filter companies are probably going to work on some kind of front filter holder system for this lens as well, but those things can be quite bulky and a little expensive. The lens is also dust and splash resistant, and you can see a weather sealing gasket around that rear mount. The lens is so big that it comes with its own heavy-duty tripod collar, the first one I've ever seen on a wide-angle lens. That's a useful accommodation though for astrophotography shooters. Then comes an aperture control ring, always nice to see, and you can also control whether it clicks or turns smoothly, and you can also lock it in place, either in or out of automatic mode, so that's really helpful too. Other controls on the side of the lens include an auto manual focus switch, a focus hold button, and a manual focus locking switch. That could be helpful for astrophotographers as well who want to lock the lens into infinity. Then, near the front, we get a large rubberized manual focus ring, which turns incredibly smoothly and is electronically coupled to the focus motor. As you focus in and out, focus breathing can be seen here, which takes the form of strong warping in the corners, although video makers are never going to be making focus pulls this big on such a wide-angle optic. The lens's autofocus motor is very fast and responsive, as you can see here in autofocus continuous mode, and that could be useful if you're shooting certain events with lots of action at f1.4. The lens's front cap is particularly interesting. It clicks into place very positively and securely. However, Sigma have also built into it a couple of holders that click open and shut for any gel filters you may be using in the holder in the rear mount of the lens. What an interesting idea, although Sigma recommends that you don't keep your gel filters in the cap for long periods of time. Whether you get any use out of that hidden feature, I don't know, but it's certainly an interesting one. The lens also comes with one of Sigma's excellent carry bags, which I find can fit quite nicely on my belt when I'm shooting a wedding or some other event. The lens is not image stabilized. Overall, well, this is exactly what a lens that costs $1,500 US should be like. Absolutely excellent in its build quality, although landscape photographers might be a bit put off by its sheer size and weight and, understandable, lack of a front filter thread. Okay, more importantly, let's look at image quality. I'll be testing it today on my Sony a7R III with its 42 megapixel full frame sensor. In-camera corrections are turned on. At f1.4 in the middle of the image, right away we see razor sharpness and excellent contrast. Nice. And the image corners? Wow, even at f1.4 the image corners are almost as good. This is incredibly impressive for such a groundbreaking lens. The image inner corners is a little dark, but just look at that sharpness and contrast, and total lack of colour fringing. Stopping down to f2 doesn't really change anything, but at f2.8, corner sharpness becomes as perfectly razor sharp as the middle. The lens stays this sharp down to about f11, but at f16 a touch of softness emerges due to the effect of diffraction. Still, I'm blown away. Not only are Sigma offering us a groundbreakingly bright aperture in this lens, but it also happens to be the sharpest 14mm optic I have ever tested, even better than Sony's equivalent G Master lens. It really is something else. You're certainly getting your money's worth here. Okay, let's turn off those in-camera corrections and take a look at distortion and vignetting. Without corrections, we see moderate barrel distortion and dark corners at f1.4. They brighten up a lot at f2 and f2.8. So not a disastrous performance here, but you will definitely want to use corrections in camera or when editing RAW files. Let's see about close-up image quality now. The lens can focus as closely as 30 centimeters to your subject. That may sound like a slightly long way for such a wide-angle lens, but you need to remember that that's 30 centimeters from your camera's sensor, and the lens itself is pretty long, so you can actually get some decent magnification for smaller subjects here, leading to some very fun and creative images. Close-up image quality at f1.4 is fairly sharp, but with low contrast and colour fringing issues. At f2 the contrast is better, and at f2.8 we see razor sharpness at close distances. Let's see how the lens works against bright lights now, an important issue for an extreme wide-angle lens. Thankfully and impressively, we're seeing virtually no flaring or loss of contrast at all when bright lights are in your image, a feature not to be taken for granted. And while we're working in the dark, let's take a look at those all-important coma levels. Even at f1.4, bright points of light in the corners of your images show almost no coma smearing at all. Amazing! Stop down to f2 or f2.8 and any tiny little wings that were there are totally gone. Let's zoom out and look for sun stars now. Only really at f11 or f16 do they begin to emerge, and not very strongly. For anyone interested, here's the night shot I showed you earlier. Do you want to look more closely? These are the corners at f1.4. Just magnificent. Just look at the glory of God's creation. I wonder how many stars there are in just this tiny stretch of the night sky, let alone in a whole band of the Milky Way. It's just unfathomable, and the Sigma lens is having no problems capturing them. Let's look at the quality of this lens's bokeh. Despite this being an extreme wide-angle lens, you'd be surprised at the out-of-focus backgrounds you can achieve at f1.4 when shooting a little closely to your subject. It gives you a wonderfully artistic effect, especially considering how closely you can shoot to your subject with the lens, and those out-of-focus backgrounds always look lovely and soft to me, with nice specular highlights, which is not something always guaranteed with such a wide-angle optic. Finally, let's look at longitudinal chromatic aberration. At f1.4 it's really strong, unfortunately. At f2 it's reduced, and at f2.8 it's virtually gone altogether. In real life shooting though, this is not as big of an issue on an ultra-wide angle lens as it is on, say, a portrait lens. Overall, well, this record-breaking 14mm lens is the best 14mm lens in terms of technical performance, so congratulations to Sigma's designers for doing something original and knocking it out of the park. For anyone doing indoor, event, or most of all astrophotography, then shooting with the Sigma 14mm f1.4 is about as pleasurable as doing a really big sneeze while simultaneously driving over a humpback bridge, which is to say, very pleasurable indeed. And when you see the quality of its results on a big screen, you may be spun into a hypomania of geeky photography ecstasy. What I'm trying to say is, I like the lens, and nothing can really beat it. The downsides of it are its large size and weight, and that using filters might be a bit cumbersome. Aside from that, this really is a unique and generally perfect lens, and so its hefty price tag is quite justified for those with a bit of spare cash lying around. Highly recommended. Thanks for watching everyone. Being able to afford a camera lens like this is a pipe dream for me, quite frankly, but thanks to my Patreon supporters, I can at least afford to keep making these test videos. Thank you so much to my lovely supporters over there. Check out my Patreon page in the description below, where supporters get all kinds of exclusive bonus content just for them that I really enjoy putting together. Happy shooting, all you night owls out there.